Hi, HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today, we have a special guest. We're joined by Seddeek. Ash is a best-selling author of the book Meaning, How Leaders Create Meaning and Clarity During Times of Crisis and Opportunity. He's also the co-founder of the Executive Greatness Institute, where executives come to enhance their executive presence and develop their thought leadership platform for internal and external communications. Ash, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you very much, Chris, for having me. Doing wonderful.
Well, thanks for joining us. We're very excited about getting you on the show. So glad we made it happen.
Yes,
Ash,
thank
for
you so
our
much.
listeners that aren't aware of your background, give us a little bit of insight of your background and your journey to where we are today.
Absolutely. So I started out being a university instructor and eventually came to the US, started working for Charles Schwab in San Francisco. And soon thereafter, I actually started working at Deloitte & Touche in San Francisco in their human capital practice, really thinking about how do you develop leaders, how do you build programs that enhance performance at different levels in Deloitte's client companies. And that's really how it started. Then I ended up going into high tech, working at Oracle Corporation, developing very high value selling methodologies to all of the sales organization within and consulting, and then eventually also did the same thing for Cisco Systems, where I built sales training programs for top sellers, leadership development programs for all of Cisco managers and directors, and then eventually also worked on large scale executive communications initiative around sales kickoff and the partner summit at Cisco, and now essentially running my own practice as well.
Amazing. What a journey.
Very quickly.
So what inspired you and Leslie Rubin to write the book?
Yeah, I think it was a very pivotal moment for us when we were working at Cisco in 2008 is the year that we remembered in particular because we saw Cisco as well as a lot of other companies around the world really having to face up to the financial crisis that was taking place. It was similar to 2001 where almost like everything stopped. A lot of deals stopped. Right, when you were just about to close a deal, multi-million-dollar deal, the customers basically chickened out, and a lot of that started happening. So, of course, Cisco got impacted revenue-wise. There was also a lot of talk about what technologies were actually going to be very successful going forward. And we saw John Chambers, the CEO of Cisco at that time, and his leadership team really grappling with how do we communicate, how do we sustain everybody's commitment within the company during this time of crisis, and how can we flip that around and talk to them about the vision for the future so they can stay on. So this was really that pivotal moment that got us thinking about what if we actually tried to show what John and his executive team have done here at Cisco, what is it like in other companies as well? How do actually leaders sort of manage moments like this, whether it's a crisis or they really want to steer the organization around towards a particular new opportunity. So that's really what we charted out to do. And we spoke to 12 leaders around a number of industries, men and women, to just see how they handled these issues. So it was actually a very interesting insights that we gathered. We didn't really set out to discover anything earth-shattering, but we really wanted to see what were the motions that each one of these leaders followed in order to ensure that everybody was on the same page with them.
So what surprised you the most when you were doing the research and you was connecting with these guys? What were some of the key insights that you took away that surprised you or perhaps that could be valuable for our audience?
I think the most fundamental insight that we found is the fact that when you find a CEO, a leader of a company, really being very comfortable with the uncertainty, being very comfortable with the unknown, and then being able to actually have the guts to go out and say, I may not know all the answers, but here's where we are today, and here's where I think we are going. Because people, as you see us in the book talking about, one of the Cisco executives, Ron Ritchie, basically says organizations are like, best-selling novels. If you don't achieve clarity, the ambiguity of that novel, around that novel, will actually push that novel to, the highest selling list on the New York Times and everything. Why? Because people start talking about it. They don't know what it is about, and it just continues building up all of this ambiguity. And that ambiguity then slows everybody down at the same time. So it's very interesting to see how clarity then gets everybody thinking, I know where we're going, let's go. Whereas I don't know where we're going, let's wait. So that dynamic is very, very disturbing, because when you think about multi-billion-dollar organizations with 50,000 or even more employees, can you imagine what that means in terms of productivity loss that happens? And that's really where we think meaning here is really more about how do we communicate what path we're following and how we can get all the arrows in the organization going in the same direction. Companies struggling with this every single day.
And if you don't have that, that's where you get that disengagement, right? From the employees
Exactly.
and from
Exactly.
the investors, from everyone, to be honest. Unless you
Yes.
have a CEO with a
Yes.
clear vision and they're capable of communicating that throughout the organization. Especially,
Absolutely.
it's even more important during times of turbulence, right? That someone has
Exactly.
that strength and that courage to say, this is where we're going, and commit to that, as opposed to being half in and half out, right? As well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when we looked at the research, that's a great point you're making about engagement, because when we looked at the research, it's almost $350 billion problem in the US alone. You can imagine what that looks like in the European Union or other parts of the world. This whole idea of being very, very clear on where we're going, really, to your point, really produces a very high level of engagement, especially when you actually do it at every level of the organization. And we can definitely talk more about that, where that leader knows that one of his top priorities is to make sure that he or she is communicating a vision, and then working with the leadership team, really cascading that down. And of course, Cisco has a fantastic system that it has built over the years in terms of the leadership team, the executive communications team behind it, and then everybody else working to really make sure we get that cascade down. That's really where we believe companies can excel in getting that clarity, to your point, and that clarity drives the engagement.
Well, I know now you work, Ash, with a lot of chief executives one-on-one as part of what you
Yes.
do, and you've obviously delved a lot more deeper, right, into this. What have you learned from these conversations one-on-one with
Yes.
chief executives from some of these leading global brands?
I think the thing that surprised me the most is whenever I'm coaching executives one-on-one, a lot of the time you actually see a problem of really understanding what the role is about. And in most cases, what trips us up is that you find us liking to doing certain things because they produce certain emotions in us. So we actually find leaders forgetting the importance of being the strategists, of being the people that really sort of point out what that direction is. And you see them actually coming and delving into the mechanics and the tactics of the business. So I think the key insight that I got was when I explained to leaders that they actually need to be the strategists and really helping people figure out where we're going, that is the most important thing for them to do. It's not working in the business, it's actually working on the business. That's what everybody else in the company is looking up to them for. So when they actually see you in the trenches with them, maybe it's good for a first moment. They see you maybe leading by example, but if you spend too much time there, then it becomes really destructive for the kind of value you could be creating if you spent the time really thinking about what is around the corner, and can you go there and come back and tell me how I can get prepared and get there myself. So that is a fundamental issue we see with leaders, is most of the time they love certain things because they enjoy doing it, but it's not what they should be doing. So I think it's very important for leaders to do that inventory of activities to find out what is it that I'm doing versus what is it that I should be doing, and really continue to optimize that list of tasks every single day.
Well, when it comes to the transformation piece, and we've spoken about this before, how can HR help those leaders and those executives through times of transformation and change? So I feel like that's a really important role that HR can play, and where they can really have
Absolutely.
meaningful impact.
Yes.
Could you talk to that a bit more?
Yes, I think HR practitioners are an amazing source of intelligence from the organization. They can really help these leaders understand what the blind spots are, what's happening to the culture. They can basically come back and say, here's what the behavior of the executive team is really causing. to happen within the culture itself. So I believe the HR team is really working with the organization all the way down to the very last mile. They understand what the people managers are dealing with, what the staff issues are, the development opportunities that exist within the organization. So I believe one of the key things that leaders need to be doing is really consulting with the HR organization a whole lot more to really understand how is the organization functioning, what is the culture like, how is the value system really, is it flourishing within the system or not, so that they can build their own communication strategies together and start going out within the organization and communicating what that vision is and be really informed versus, let's say, going off. We always talk about people going off into these offsites, but if they don't have enough intelligence within the organization, they may come back with a vision that's not grounded in what the organization can achieve. So I think, HR practitioners and leaders can really make a big difference because they have that so much intelligence that they can bring to the table.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's only going to get even stronger now with the introduction of HR technology. They have so many more insights and so much more intelligence that they can bring to the table as well. So they're now becoming
Yes.
even more empowered, right? In the book, you say you were talking about and how some leaders you interview do all of this very well. Which leaders out of all of the ones that you've interviewed and that you've worked with, which ones stood out the most, and why?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think someone like Naidu Kubain, he is the president of High Point University, was a fantastic example for someone who came into an organization that was not doing so well and taking it to much, much higher levels of performance, growth, student body, people who are giving donations and funding into the organization, really expanding that university in a very big way and really transforming it into a thought leadership uh, source around the country. So we actually talked with him about what is it that he did to communicate that vision. And he basically spent the time working with all the faculty, the administration, even the janitorial services team members. He basically talked about how he engaged the organization at all of these different levels. And then he came back to us and basically said the one thing that he thinks is the most amazing thing for leaders to do is to figure out how to build capacity within the organization, which is this whole idea about how can you actually get them to see that they can actually stretch their capabilities. So definitely Naidu Kubain is someone that stood out for us. He's still leading that organization and taking it to new heights. We've also seen someone like Prith Banjari, who was a CTO at Schneider Electric, and how he used his own emotional intelligence and understanding of how companies work and how organizations work to really drive innovation by getting people to open up to him and build trust. So this was a key skill set to see in action, and in terms of how Prith did it by going around the world and doing these town hall meetings where these CIOs and CTOs that were part of his team really got to open up and share their own visions. He knew that the intelligence was in the room. He did
Yeah,
not want to come
but they have to feel
across, right?
comfortable. But a lot of times people don't feel comfortable to say that to your CTO or your CEO, and
Yes.
you're worried because sometimes it is criticism, or perhaps you're thinking about doing it a different way or different viewpoint. I think it's very important as a leader to make sure you have a team that's open to coming to you with new ideas or
Exactly.
problems without feeling there's going to be a consequence.
Exactly. And I think that's really where it was very touchy-feely in the beginning, where he needed to really be very careful how
Yeah.
he did it. And then once he got them to open up, it then became their own plan. It became their own initiative, and they were able to drive it across the company.
Mm.
And then we also saw someone like Sheila Jordan. She's the Chief Information Officer at Symantec, and she came in when the company was experiencing a almost like, they had to divest, they had to disconnect parts of the business, and in so doing she had to manage relationships not just within the company but with a very large service provider community, and she needed to do it in a way that's not going to disrupt the business. So she had to think about, how do I communicate as a leader within Symantec itself, within that service provider community, and keep them committed to the long-term vision for the company. So it was very exciting to hear her talk about what she did and really driving that change initiative. And that kind of leads me to really kind of give you one of the key insights I saw, and then I eventually really codified in a model called the tension index, where leaders most of the time, we're expecting them to really tell us what's around the corner. How can you really come to us with a vision for where do we need to take the experiences of customers or partners, of employees to the next level? And then you drive that change. And that's why, as we said earlier, if you work so much in the business, you're not going to be able to see what those experiences could be. And then you bring them to us and talk to us about them in a way that invigorates us in order for us to participate in that activity.
And that leads us quite nicely on to, you talk about the 10 leadership behaviors as
Yes.
well. And I think this is one thing that I was very excited to share with the audience. Could you jump into that and give us an overview of those?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm going to look here at my notes just to make sure we cover all of them.
Sure.
And the very first one is that leaders cultivate authentic humility, as you were talking now about Prith and how he basically came across as, I don't know all the answers.
It's approachable, right? Yeah.
Is approachable, exactly. And then the next thing is that they clarify and focus on the organization's mission and values. Very, very critical. And we see a lot of leaders talking about that, how once you set those top 5, 10 values, how can you then as a leader make sure that you spread that word out across the organization? And then they also get out of the way so others can succeed. That's a very critical component. Again, we see Preth doing that, we see Naidu Cubane doing that, and making sure that his management team really flourishes within the organization. The next one is they build a solid network of relationships, and that's critical. You see Sheila Jordan doing this, as I mentioned, within the company, within the service provider community. They also start building strategic partnerships. They know in order for them to get things done, they may craft strategic partnerships with board members, with the executive team, with leadership within the company, partner communities. And then we also saw that they care for and reward their people. They understand you have to really think about the emotions and how you are keeping people engaged. And in some cases, you need to recognize success and celebrate what happened in order for you to get the firepower and the energy for the next round. And we also saw them over communicate with all the stakeholders, especially in times of crisis, of course, or change. As we've seen, the story about John Chambers, that was very critical for him to double up on how much he was talking to the organization. We actually saw him using Cisco technology to communicate across the world. They build trust and buy-in. That's very critical for them. And then we also saw them accept the reality that business cycles inevitably include a lot of change. And as a leader, you need to sort of come across as you're comfortable with that, but also communicate the fact that you have empathy for the fact that your own people may not necessarily be as good as you are in really living with that in mind. And then finally, they cultivate the habit of listening and learning. So they go around the organization, as we said, when we were talking about the role of HR practitioners and leaders, is how can you actually gather intelligence so that you come across as someone who knows what their aspirations are and also what their pains are. And then you're able to craft stories to talk to your organization with these insights and with that intelligence. So I think these 10 areas of leadership communication behaviors we've seen come up in all the different stories of leaders that we spoke to. And then when we hear Jack Welch talking about how leaders need to be chief meeting officers, that was a fantastic validation for Leslie and myself as we look at the key point of view that we had about the book is the fact that you need to be the person that says, here's what's happening now, here's where we're going, where we've been, and why I want you to be part of that journey with me. And here's what's in it for you and for us and for our customers.
Amazing. And it's definitely a lot to take in.
Yes,
don't worry,
yes.
For everyone listening, guys, I'm gonna link those in the show notes, those top 10.
Absolutely.
So you can all see those on there as well. So you have that. So I suppose the question really is, Ash, is what are some steps that we can do to help these guys become better leaders? What are some actionable steps that we can now take to go in the right direction?
I like what you said earlier about HR leaders. I think the first thing that I would very much encourage all leaders is to really partner up with the HR organization, because that's really where the pulse is. They're going to give you a lot of intelligence. That's one. The other one is you need to remember the fact that they need to be the strategists and the inventors, they need to look around the corner and talk to the customers and understand what are the aspirations that these customers have. They need to talk to the employees and their business partners and really be in that sort of information gathering stage all the time. And of course, along the way, you stop, you reflect, and you basically say, this is where the organization is, this is where I need to take it, and understand that you need to build a bridge of meaning between where we are today to where we are going to be. Realize that that's actually a bridge between two emotions, one emotion of frustration and one emotion of aspiration. And that's really where, as a leader, you need to get very good at. I know that's where we are now. We've been there before. Here's what happened in the past, and use stories to basically tell them, we've been there before. We've been able to accomplish achievements before. So I think once leaders develop that muscle and realize that is really what the role should be about. So if they like board meetings, if they like these quarterly reviews, that's fine and dandy, as we say here in the US, but you need to be thinking about what is actually my role, is to really be good at communicating the vision, the strategy, and explain why are we going where we're going and what it means for everybody.
So I'm interested, when you work with these guys on one-on-one basis or with the teams, where do you start? What does the process look like for you? Because it's always interesting to understand how you approach this, because it's going to be a similar way that people will do so, whether they work with someone like
Yes.
yourself or whether they address themselves personally. Where would you start as a way of sort of diagnosing this, and what does that look like when you're working with these clients?
To be honest, when I do executive coaching, I definitely try to, again, as you said earlier, we need to partner with HR. So I try to partner with HR leaders to understand what are the issues that exist around that leader, whether it's the leadership style, as well as also what's happening in their organization. And I try to understand what are the mindsets and philosophies that are driving the action. Because most of the time we may actually look at the situation and say, oh, I wish she communicated better, or I wish she communicated better. But sometimes, as we were saying earlier, it's actually more about the mindset that's driving the behavior. How do they actually see the role? And that's what I try to identify first. Because a lot of the time, they are actually misreading what the role is. A lot of the time happens at all levels of the organization. They love working in the business and not on the business. So I basically try to sort of get them out of that barrel where they are really focusing more on the tactics and what they like to do, and focus more on what the organization itself wants them to do. So gaining that clarity is very essential step to understand, what are the dynamics of the issues surrounding that leader, and then where we need to take that leader. And a lot of the time, surprising, but we actually find leaders most of the time underestimating the gravity and the magnitude of the changes that are happening, and how they themselves need to be communicating almost every single day and preaching and really evangelizing what that vision for the future is. And that's a huge effort. And I think Cisco and Cisco leadership does an amazing job around that. And again, even Cisco, when we coach executives or other companies as well, you need to reiterate the fact that you need to be doing this on a constant basis.
Yeah, over and over again. This is not a one-off. We're not going to do a kickoff week and we discuss this. This
Exactly.
is ongoing communication to everyone, especially in a large
Absolutely.
organization when you have hundreds, if not thousands, of new employees joining every other month, right?
Exactly.
Business. You have to
Yes.
continually do that. And sometimes even me as a founder of my own startup, right? Even with a
Yes.
small team here, sometimes I assume that people know what my vision is. Right. And I assume
Yeah,
that I
exactly.
told you this, once upon a time, 2 months ago, that this is where
Yeah.
we are going. But you have to consistently, relay that to the team so
Yes.
they know exactly where we're going. And I've actually tried to
Yes.
do that on a weekly basis now. On our Monday morning meeting, we go over it again and again and again, so
That's
everyone
awesome.
understands exactly where we're working towards, and these are the steps that we're going to take to achieve that. But consistently do that as well. And it's good for
Exactly.
me as well to have it in my own mind.
To remember, exactly, right?
Exactly right.
Yes.
Sometimes you
Yes.
can see different shiny objects that you maybe want to run towards, but you have to really sort of put your head down and focus on that, as
Yes.
opposed to getting
Yes.
distracted. And
Exactly.
and I find a lot as well. You mentioned some leaders focus on one particular things that they're good at. I think a lot of the times businesses don't prepare those leaders, so they may promote them into that role, but may not necessarily give them the best development plan. So, for example, for me, I
Yes.
felt this going from a sales executive to a director. I had no training on what it meant to be a
To
director.
be one.
So
Yeah,
I
exactly.
naturally just wanted to keep selling, right? But my job was
Yes.
no longer to keep selling, which was what I was really good at. It was now to develop my
Yes.
team, to recruit, to support my team, and to obviously
Exactly.
look at the overall strategy of the business and the team and the products that I was working on, as opposed to focusing on just selling, which is what I did before.
Exactly.
And it
And it
simply,
happens all the time.
I can imagine, and in much more
Yes.
complex environments than I was in either as well.
Yes.
So I can only imagine when you become a CEO, it's now 10 times more difficult and challenging as you're looking at so many different moving parts at the
Yes.
same time. And
Exactly.
naturally, you're going to gear towards one particular area, whether it's, your background is in supply chain or, from the technology point of view, wherever it may be. So it's very interesting.
Exactly.
Very, very
Exactly.
interesting. And sometimes you're right.
Absolutely.
They may need someone like yourself or like HR that has an outside perspective that can come in and really assess it and look at it from a different perspective as themselves and their team, because most of the time their team won't tell them.
Exactly right. Exactly. You need some trusted advisors who will basically
Yeah.
tell you things as they are,
Yeah.
because to your point, what got you here is not what's going to get you there,
Love
as
that.
Marshall
Yep. Yep.
Goldsmith
Hmm.
says. And you see this a lot, and that's why I talk about this idea of the joy of change. That leaders sometimes they make an assumption that everybody gets it, but we actually need to get very, very detailed around the picture of our vision, so then it becomes actually joyful for us to talk about it. Because otherwise, people will say, what are you talking about? No one likes to change. But it's
Yeah.
actually in a very vivid description of what that change is that it actually might then get very enjoyable and emotional for people to say, you know what? We like where you're going. We want to go with you because you've given us such a vivid picture of how life is going to be once we get there.
And the why, right? The reason why behind it, and
Absolutely,
what that
yes.
means for those employees, what that means. I think everyone in the business should understand what that means for them individually, and that's the job of
Yes,
their line
exactly.
manager or their leader to explain that this is what it means for us and our department and our team, and this is why we're going in that. And if you don't have that, straight away you have disengaged employees, you have uncertainty, you have worry, you have all, and obviously, of course, that impacts productivity and the bottom line straight away. And that could rapidly happen, and we've seen it in many organizations.
Exactly, yeah,
Whereas,
exactly.
so it's so important, and not to bang on about it because we've said it a million times, but this isn't a one-off, 1 week, 1 month. This is ongoing, day in, day out. It needs to be constantly communicated to the team, right?
Yes, yes,
Um,
exactly. And manage your emotions and manage the things you like doing versus the things that you should be doing. That's really, as you said, that's what could trip people up. If you
mhm.
like selling and that's what you want to do, you have to be able to say, stop. Chris, that's not what I should be doing. I need to be leading this team and sharing with them my vision. And as you said,
Exactly.
you do this now on a weekly basis, which is fantastic for your business.
Amazing. Well, Ash, it's been amazing you joining us, and you've definitely provided some actionable advice for our listeners. So I know they'll be a lot better off for it. So thank you for that. Before we
Absolutely.
part ways, give our listeners, if there's one parting piece of guidance that you could give to our leaders, what would that be? And secondly, what's the best way for our listeners to learn more about you and the work that you're doing and get in contact with you?
Absolutely. So I think that the most important piece of advice, and you said it very early on, you need to engage people around you and gather intelligence from them, and make sure that you tap into the intelligence of the organization. I would start definitely with the HR practitioners because they have a whole lot more of what we basically call the culture understanding, the pulse. And all of that information is very useful for leaders. So I think a lot of leaders sometimes they go off and they work alone, and what we want them to do is do a lot more with their teams, very much like what Prith did, so that eventually what you end up creating is something that everybody has participated in shaping. And in terms of people engaging with us at the Executive Greatness Institute, we work with leaders to help them build their leadership platform. How do you communicate a signature talk around these initiatives that you're building and you're thinking about? This will be what it is that we do and how we do it so well, because we've actually done it in large companies with very iconic leadership around these top companies. And in terms of reaching out to me, I can share my email address, ash@connectwithash.com or ash at executivegreatness.com. Both of those connections will bring them over to me. And I'm sure you'll also share some of this information in the show notes, Chris.
Sure. And that's just to be clear for everyone listening, you also work very closely with the HR leaders themselves, right? in terms of their own
Absolutely.
development
That's,
for everyone
yeah.
listening. Yeah. So I want to make sure everyone's clear.
Yes. That's my
clear.
starting point.
Exactly.
I'm glad you mentioned that up, because that's really my starting point. An
Yeah.
HR leader brings me in and says, I'm working with this executive. We have these high potential leaders. There are some blind spots. We need to get them out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really how I come into organizations, is through my HR contacts, who basically say, we need to bring you in to help us with either a one-on-one coaching opportunity that we need to be working on, or group coaching. And sometimes we actually build leadership development programs for them, or large initiative communication strategies. So we've done both of those aspects of the equation, where again, we start actually our work with the HR practitioner. So that's really how we gain the insight and the intelligence. And that's why I said that's the first thing you want to do, is get that intelligence, because it's not available anywhere else. You need to
No.
really have that HR practitioner as the strategist, sitting with you at that strategy table, thinking with you how you can craft it together.
Mm-hmm. Well, no one listening to the show is going to disagree with you, the value that HR brings to the table
Absolutely,
in
yes.
terms of the insights. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted you to join us on the show, Ash. I really appreciate you taking the time out. Guys,
Absolutely.
head over to hrleaders.com. There you'll find all the show notes on the episode, everything we've been talking about, linked to the book, linked to all of the different resources, and Ash's website will all be linked in the description for you guys. Ash, thank you again for joining us, and I wish you all the best. Until we next
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chris. And we'll definitely also share with you a link for people to get the book at a discount. So we'll make that
amazing.
available for your audience as well. Yes.
Fantastic.